Hello, everyone. I'm Rosemary Tyrrell, the Director of the Office of Faculty Development at the UCR School of Medicine. And I was asked to create a video tutorial on how to represent yourself professionally on Zoom. You know, it's likely that classes, telemedicine, meetings, and other forms of interaction using video conference tools like Zoom are going to be with us for quite some time. So here are some things to consider when representing yourself on Zoom. First, we're going to focus primarily on representing yourself in a classroom environment, but nearly all these tips are also true if you're engaging in another type of Zoom session, whether it's an interview for a residency program, a meeting, or a telemedicine session. First, don't skip your Zoom sessions. It's especially important right now for you to make those small connections with your instructors and your classmates. Watching them later on a recording isn't the same thing as connecting in real time. Remember that a Zoom classroom is a classroom. You're expected to show the same courtesy and professionalism that you would in any class. Just with any other class, you're expected to be there on time, or perhaps even consider being there a few minutes early to make sure your camera, audio, and everything is working properly and that you can connect. You want to log in from a quiet environment. If you start logging in from places like Starbucks or other noisy places, when it comes time to unmute and participate in the session, you're going to be creating a lot of background noise. When you log in and register for the session, use your real name and use your complete name. Avoid any kind of silly nicknames. It may seem like fun, but it makes it a lot harder for the faculty member to take attendance or keep track of questions, and it's just not very professional. Keep in mind that if we understand that if you're phoning in, it may not be as easy to enter a name and we may still end up seeing your phone number. Consider keeping a paper and a pen at the ready to take notes during a Zoom session. Don't rely on a recording of the video or being provided the PowerPoint slides to substitute for your notes. And I realize that may be breaking a bit of a norm, but the research shows that students who take physical notes retain the information better than those who use provided materials. If you don't want to use old-fashioned pen and paper, of course, there's a million note-taking apps you can use to take notes on your computer. Actively taking notes is especially important in a Zoom session where it's much easier to get distracted or lose track of what the speaker is saying. Another question to consider is whether you want to keep your microphone on or off. If you are in a large group, always keep your mic off unless you're talking to reduce background noise. Now, we've all been there when someone didn't realize they were unmuted and somebody else walks in the room and now we're all listening to their private conversation and it's completely disrupting the session. However, in a small group like a breakout session, keep your mic turned on. That allows for a much more normal flow of conversation. You know, you can hear people laughing, you can jump into the conversation more naturally. You don't have those long lag times when somebody's trying to find the button to turn their microphone on. And unless you have a screaming baby or a barking dog right in the same room with you, if it's a small group, a little background noise is not going to be that big of a problem. In a larger group, though, to avoid talking over each other when you do want to speak, consider using the raised hand icon to get the speaker's attention and wait to be acknowledged before you jump in. And it also is helpful if you own a headset with a mic. That makes for the best audio. If you have one, use it, instead of using that built-in computer mic, which tends to sound a little tinny. Also important that you give signals when you're finished speaking by saying something like, that's it, or I'm all done, thank you. Something that just kind of gives a signal that you're done so someone else can continue. Same thing if you ask a question. If the instructor has answered your question, give a thumbs up or some other indication that your question was fully answered so that they know that they can move on. Now remember, if you're using the chat box to communicate, that's a public forum, and a copy of that chat will likely be archived, and it may even be shared on the learning management system. So keep your comments as professional as you would in any face-to-face session. And overall, remember that most of these sessions are being recorded and that you need to conduct yourself accordingly. It's not appropriate in class, it's not appropriate online. Another question is, do you want to keep your camera off or on? And it's a general rule that if you're in a small group like a breakout session, you are expected to keep your camera on. Part of the reason for having those small groups is to create a better sense of learning community. And having a camera on creates that better sense of community. In a larger group, try and keep your camera on if you can. We understand that there may be times if you're having problems with connectivity that you have to turn your camera off. But you may want to talk to your classmates about taking turns keeping your camera off, because it's very difficult for the instructor to teach when they feel like they're talking into a void and they can't see any of your faces. So we really want to encourage. Some colleges are making it a requirement that students keep their cameras on during sessions. So just consider doing that, voluntarily. Another suggestion, of course, is to dress the same way you would for a classroom session, and at the very least, the part of your body that's on camera. I always encourage students to actually not be completely undressed, even if it's a part of your body you think isn't going to show, because you just never know when you're going to have to get up and close a door or open a window, and you don't want the entire class to see you in your jammies or in your undies. And while we're on the subject, consider the setting in which you conduct your Zoom session. A messy, cluttered background is very distracting, and it makes you look really unprofessional. Noisy backgrounds that have a lot of information in them are distracting for other participants. So choose a more appropriate setting. And if you don't have a setting that you feel works well, or if you want to maintain some privacy in your own home, that's certainly understandable. Consider using a virtual background. Try to keep your virtual backgrounds generally neutral and appropriate for the classroom space. Again, if people are paying attention to your background, then they're not paying attention to you, and that's not a good thing. In a regular conversation, when we're talking to someone face to face, we're not staring at ourselves when we're talking, but in a Zoom session, that can be very distracting. So to avoid focusing all the time on yourself and your appearance, just right-click your image and select Hide View. That way you won't see yourself when you're talking, and you can focus on the other person just like you would in a normal conversation. And also, don't eat or chew gum on camera. I mean, that's very unprofessional looking. Nobody wants to see that. And your pets, of course, they're adorable, but they're also really distracting. So there's a reason actors don't like to work with animals, because they steal the scene. So keep your pets off screen unless you're, Zooming with friends or having an informal interaction with someone. If it's a professional environment, you want to keep your pets out of the room. Also, be aware of your lighting. Lighting from behind makes it look like you're in the witness protection program and you're trying to hide your face. A bright light right behind you is blinding for other viewers and very distracting. So you need your lighting to come from the front so that we can see your face. And just like in an actual conversation, you want to make eye contact. You don't want that serial killer stare. You don't have to stare into the camera the entire time. But we tend to, in a video conference, we tend to look at the little box on screen of the picture of whoever's talking, and we forget to make eye contact. So just remember to look up into the camera. And if you're doing any screen sharing during your session, make sure that you're selecting the screen that you actually wanted to share. So that a window comes up, and if you have multiple monitors, it's giving you a choice of which monitor you want to share. Make sure that you aren't sharing a private email or other content you don't want others to see. There's a really famous example of a newscaster who was on a national news program. When he shared his screen, he had a bunch of pornography tabs open. And the image I'm sharing with you is from the University of Miami, where a professor was actually fired for the same thing. I can't actually share the image that what he shared. That's how bad it was. But obviously the students noticed and they were making comments. I would recommend, that you close anything inappropriate anytime you're in class or in a video meeting or in a video interview, etc., just to avoid any accidents of showing something that really shouldn't be shown. And likewise, you probably want to close most everything anyway when you're during a class session. You don't want to be multitasking. You may think you're being subtle if you're sitting in a meeting or you're sitting in a class session and you're checking your emails. I look like I'm paying attention, but I'm really doing other things. It's not subtle. We can see that. Don't watch videos. Don't listen to music. Don't use other apps while you're attending a class or a session. Not only is it very bad manners, it can lower the performance of your computer. And really, whether we're talking about a face-to-face class session or a class session online, in my personal opinion, I think it's one of the rudest things you can do to someone is to ignore them when they're trying to talk to you. And when you do this to your instructors, you're exhibiting extreme rudeness. And part of being a professional is showing courtesy towards others, whether or not you find what they have to say, fascinating. You can't just pull out your headphones and pop them on during a meeting if you think the topic is boring. That's not how professionals behave. You shouldn't be doing that in class either, whether it's virtual or face-to-face. If you're trying to be rude, well done, mission accomplished. But if you're trying to practice what it means to be a grown-up and a professional, then this is a very rude thing to be doing and you shouldn't be doing it. Also, participate. If there's a polling question, if there are breakout rooms, if someone asks you to go to a Google Doc and share your thoughts, they ask you to respond verbally or in the chat box when they ask a question, really make the extra effort to be actively participating, because it helps create a much better session and a much stronger sense of learning community. So that improves the session for everyone. And finally, just remember that you are expected to hold the same professional standards in a virtual session that you're expected to uphold at all times, whether you're in class, on a clinical rotation, or whatever you're doing. I would argue that it's even more important in a virtual session where it's being recorded and, could be shared. You don't want to be the next viral video on YouTube of someone who's looking totally ridiculous. So these are just a few ways for you to keep your professional image strong and represent yourself well when you're using a video conference tour. Thank you for your attention.